NetCredit is here to say yes, because you're more than a credit score. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partners. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
I'm so excited to tell you about Delete Me, the sponsor of this podcast. Have you ever Googled yourself? It's so frustrating that things like our name, email address, phone number, and even the list of our relatives are being sold online by data brokers. This poses a considerable threat to our privacy, especially if our personal info ends up in the hands of scammers or stalkers. I wanted to put an end to this, which is why I went to joindeleteme.com and signed up for Delete Me. Delete Me's privacy experts comb through the countless data broker websites looking for places your data shouldn't be, remove it, and send you a report on what they've done. They do this all year round, so I don't have to think about it. Since I opened my Delete Me account, I feel better knowing my info isn't easily available online to be used against me for fraud, harassment, or identity theft. You can get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/protect. Go to joindeleteme.com/protect. That's joindeleteme.com/protect.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Great Plains Archaeology Podcast. Join me as we uncover the rich histories of North America's Great Plains, exploring the latest archaeological discoveries and past cultures that shape this storied region. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to episode 18 of the Great Plains Archaeology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Carlton Shield Chief Gover, and I am thrilled to have you join me on this exciting journey through the rich and fascinating history of North America's Great Plains. Today, we have our first guest to the podcast. It is David Ian Howe. David is an American anthropologist, comedian, and science communicator. He's the guy who talks about the science of the human and dog relationship, also known as ethnosynology. David hosts the David Ian Howe Show, where he interviews fellow scientists and creators. He also directs Ethnosynology, a popular Instagram, YouTube, and podcast series. And David and I used to co-host the A Life in Ruins podcast, along with our buddy Connor Johnen, for over 170 episodes over the course of 4 years. And yeah, we just finished recording an episode for Ethnosynology, and I was able to wrangle David into being a co-host for the Great Plains Archaeology Podcast here today. So David, thank you so much for being on the show. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. How about you?
I'm doing great. Super happy to have you on the podcast. I've been meaning to have other archaeologists on the show to talk, and I think you are the beginning of that. I reached out to Dr. Alex Crabe not too long ago to talk about Alm, and I'll probably ask Spencer to do Hell Gap, and I think I'll reach out to Todd to do Laprelle.
I was just about to say that I'm definitely probably not the person for this podcast, but then I thought about it, and most of the shovel holes I have dug were in the plains. So
yeah, I was about to say you've worked in the Northwest Plains like pretty extensively.
I've done a lot of field work.
But even beyond that, your work with ethnosynology, looking at the relationship between dogs and humans, canids and humans, across a vast amount of time and space, where you've looked at Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, like you have your paws and a lot of different dirt across the globe. So I figured this would be just a good opportunity to have you on and just kind of talk to the 6 listeners of this show about dogs and canids in the Great Plains, and to the best of your knowledge. So, I mean, just to start us off, looking at human-dog relationships in archaeology is a rather niche field. What really brought you into getting involved at focusing on human-dog interactions through time and space?
Yeah, let me just start by adding a little, preface. I don't work for a university. Whatever I say is my opinions, I guess. It's not really beholden to the University of Wyoming or anywhere I went. I am not an Indigenous person. I do a lot of research on that and have spoken with a lot of Indigenous people, personal communication wise, on this, and looked through ethnographic stuff. So a lot of what I do understand comes from that. This is not personal experience, and it could be wrong. And again, our Indigenous cultures are no monolith. So what one tribe in the plains says, I might accidentally attribute to all of them, and that sometimes can happen. But yeah, with that said, what was your question one more time? I'm sorry.
How'd you get involved and interested in the field of ethnocynology?
Yeah, I don't exactly know how to pinpoint this. I give a different answer every time, but I would say the quick answer that you'll understand was Mankind, the Story of All of Us, that History Channel documentary that was narrated by Josh Brolin.
Yeah.
I'd always loved dogs. I'd always, found it interesting. My undergrad, they talked about dogs in the zooarch class, but in that documentary, right after humans evolve in Africa and they show how humans hunt and make fire, the next scene in the whole history of mankind was domesticating wolves. And I was like, whoa, go back. Like, I want to learn more about that. And then it just went right into metallurgy and agriculture and Egypt and all that. But yeah, it's just a fascinating thing. Not talked about a lot. We all love dogs. And yeah, I applied to many master's and PhD programs trying to do it, and no one seemed too interested. So I, did my projectile point stuff and fieldwork and experimental archaeology for my thesis, but did the dog stuff in my, hobby spare time while I was at grad school and had all those resources. So I kind of got like a dual degree.
Yeah, that's fair. Regarding your master's thesis, which is the culmination of graduate level work to show to the field that you are indeed a professional with specific knowledge and contributed research to our field. Initially, you came in to the University of Wyoming to work under a zooarchaeologist to learn more specifics about animal bones and human contexts, human behavioral contexts. And then when that professor left, you got a new advisor and you shifted your master's thesis from your original plan and did more of a projectile point ballistics experiment on the efficacy of the size of projectile points fired from a bow and arrow. I would be hard pressed to say your work on ethnocynology is a hobby when you did go into Wyoming with the idea of doing a project on it, but you just had to adapt to the circumstances of the department at the time.
That is a very good way to put it. Yes, I would say maybe a hobby wasn't the best way to put it, but that was definitely my interest. And that is like my, Great Plains and Pawnee stuff for you, maps for Connor, Clovis and stuff for Spencer and Todd. It would be, for me, it's dogs. And that's just like what I found so fascinating. And it kind of speaks to the versatility of the field of anthropology, in which I could just do something completely different from my master's thesis, like within a month's notice. And, a month's notice of having to lay out the research proposal for it, I should say. Yeah. That you could just either do experimental ballistic stuff or do dogs, like how dogs behave with humans, like through behavioral ecology, or just, their history going back thousands of years. Yeah.
Right. And there was a zooarchaeologist at the time, Dr. Marcel Kornfeld, but he was like super focused on bison and Hell Gap. And it seemed like all of the grad students working for him were focused on Hell Gap. And to my knowledge, the Paleo-Indian levels at Hell Gap have not produced a canid. So like, I completely see how it makes sense for you to like, well, I'm going to do another cool thing and look at projectile point ballistics. So
yeah. And I still did zooarch. Like, my whole undergrad at UT was at the forensic center, like defleshing human bones and doing osteology. I took osteology. I got hired at my job with the Army Corps because I could do human osteology and identify animal bones and stuff. So I guess I am a zooarchaeologist, like on paper.
Yeah, I think you are.
I can also do the experimental stuff, and yeah, I like paleo. I don't know what to call myself. I just wear a lot of field hats.
You have a really good diverse amount of training. That is Thanks, for man. Sure. Pointing us back into, topic, the show's title, Great Plains Archaeology Podcast, sure. Has quickly become the Central Plains Archaeology Podcast. For me, what I've always liked about your work in terms of like a personal connection to me is, the Pawnee, we're known by other tribes as wolves of the plains, and Plains Indian sign language. The sign for Pawnee was wolf ears, like everyone referred to us as that.
No way. That's cool.
Yeah. So so if you ever, there's a really good diagram of it in Dorsey of Plains Indian Sign Language, and the sign for Pawnee is wolf ears. And the band I belong to, the Pawnee Nation, is made up of 4 bands: Skidi, Kikahaki, Pitahawidada, and Chawi. Skidi literally means wolf in Pawnee. And so I belong to the wolf band of Pawnee Indians. And like the wolf is our sigil, like we are very
Yeah.
I don't think anyone else in the Great Plains has a wolf on their sigil. Like I know like the Nez Perce or the Nez Perce and like some other tribes also have this like close relationship to wolves. And I think on the Great Plains, we're kind of the one to the point of like we would wear wolf pelts and use those to like at a distance when we don't have binoculars, right? We would use those to like scout enemy encampments and like other places because we'd basically just try to look like wolves from a distance and people couldn't tell. And it started freaking out other tribes because they couldn't actually tell. Is that a real wolf or is that a Pawnee wearing a fursuit checking out our encampment? So, I mean, in your work in ethnocynology, has it ever led you to North America's Great Plains looking at human-canid interactions?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you point that out because wolves and humans first started interacting on the tundra, I guess, or Siberia, which does have plains and boreal forests. But it's like pretty much like the plains edging up to the Rockies, like area where you and I went to school and worked, is where dogs were first like domesticated in that sense. Not in the Americas, this is in Siberia. But so what I did in my graduate studies was I just took the Handbook of the American Indian and the Bureau of Ethnology reports. I forget what those ones are called. I think it's just Bureau of Ethnology.
Yeah, Bureau of Ethnology reports, the BIE reports.
Yeah, and just a dearth or like a wealth of information in those books about even like by region. Was like there was a Great Plains book and there was a Eastern Woodlands book and a Great Basin book. And I think what I had done, this is just how graduate research kind of works, is you go to the library archives on the website, type in dogs in that, and like the major hits that were popping up, because I couldn't possibly read through every single one of them or take them all out. I guess I could have, but the Great Plains had the most. And there's just so many, especially with dog travois or travois, the wolf dog hybrids that, was the Wyoming thing too, where they'd file their teeth down to pull things. And then like buffalo bird woman was a big one. And Rachel Shimmick's thesis kind of pointed me to that as well, where she was doing caloric return rates of dogs using travois and harnesses and whatnot. But Buffalo Bird Woman, there's an account of her explaining how to train, how to raise, and how to make these dog travois. And it was, pretty interesting, and it fundamentally changed once the horse arrived, obviously, or was reintroduced. But yeah, lots of stuff in the plains. And then every region has a dog or a wolf myth or wolf, thing, just like because they kind of have something about every piece of fauna they saw that is incorporated into their mythos. But I would say the plains had quite a bit. I can't remember exactly which tribe had which, but yeah, there was a lot.
100%. And after this break, we're going to delve more specifically into Great Plains Canid interactions. So stay tuned.
NetCredit is here to say yes to a personal loan or line of credit when other lenders say no. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partner. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
I'm so excited to tell you about Delete Me, the sponsor of this podcast. Have you ever Googled yourself? It's so frustrating that things like our name, email address, phone number, and even the list of our relatives are being sold online by data brokers. This poses a considerable threat to our privacy, especially if our personal info ends up in the hands of scammers or stalkers. I wanted to put an end to this, which is why I went to joindeleteme.com and signed up for Delete Me. Delete Me's privacy experts comb through the countless data broker websites looking for places your data shouldn't be, remove it, and send you a report on what they've done. They do this all year round, so I don't have to think about it. Since I opened my Delete Me account, I feel better knowing my info isn't easily available online to be used against me for fraud, harassment, or identity theft. You can get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/protect. Go to joindeleteme.com/protect. That's joindeleteme.com/protect.
And welcome back after that commercial break. Still here with David Ian Howe, science communicator, zooarchaeologist, ethnocynologist, huge in the SciComm world. In segment one, we were just started diving into Great Plains indigenous populations and Canid interactions. And you mentioned like how so many tribes have like Canid stories. I was like really fascinated more recently because like wolves are pretty big in Pawnee culture. And then we also have our own dog stories. But I thought it was like really interesting that the Chickasaw have a story. Like I think his name is, I don't think it's actually Toby, but it's like similar to Toby. And it's like how the Milky Way was created, and it was like this great white dog in the sky that spilled cornmeal, and that's what gave us the Milky Way.
Cherokee. That's their mythology as well.
That southeast thing. And I was like, wow, that's pretty neat. And then it made me reflect, like the Pawnees, we have a ceremony and dance that is incredibly cultural to us and very Pawnee specific thing that relates to a story about dogs and how prevalent they were. And you had mentioned in that last episode some of Rachel Shimmick's work with those dog travois. And I'm always, like when I talk to students about horses, I'm like, before horses, there were dogs. Mm-hmm. And those are what carried the travois. And they don't believe me. And the fact that when I try to show images of some of the only remaining images we have of Amerindian dogs, and they're big, like they're not Cocker Spaniel size. Like the Amerindian dogs out here were very much like interbreeding with wolves on the reg. There are stories of tribes staking out a pregnant female out on the edge of camp in hopes of getting a wolf to breed with her, and like keeping those dogs like pretty heavily hybridized with wolves to keep them big.
Yeah. Because I would say most Amerindian dogs were your typical dingo colored standard yellow coat dingo looking dogs, where they were smaller. The Coster dog in Angela's paper has a good image of what they would have looked like. It was not even up to a human's knee. Pretty, but obviously indigenous people were taller than the average American now, but yeah, that would have been that. But the dogs in the plains, for sure, especially the ones that were load bearing, were frequently interbred with wolves to keep that, much like what a husky is now. Clearly that comes from a more recent wolf lineage, or is, no, Greenland dogs are very old themselves, but yeah, to keep that strength to pull sleds and to pull, load bearing dogs. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause they're pack animals, and that like, there's only 3 domesticates that are original to North America, and dogs probably not original in North America. That's
is that what pack animal refers to? I always thought that meant they like hunt in a pack, or did it mean like pack animals as in like llamas? Because I've been using that wrong.
I think it could go either way. I'm using it in the sense of like llamas, like you can pack things onto them, but I think you're absolutely right that there are pack animals that do hunt in packs.
Gotcha. Yeah, I usually say beasts of burden in that sense, but I think pack animals a little less, mean.
I never thought about the pack animals as hunting in a pack thing until you just brought it up. But anywho, yeah, language matters. So the only domesticates that were domesticated here in the Americas, North and South America, we have llamas, alpacas, turkeys, and then I said guinea pigs. Yes. And I don't know if technically they're domesticated or just kind of like contained.
And, with the little animals, like a rabbit's technically domesticated too. There's like a bunny as a domesticated rabbit. Like the English domesticated them didn't domesticate them, but they used them for stews and whatnot. The guinea pig's the same thing. It was like a tamed just animal that was bred. Gotcha. Same way we do rats or anything. Like lab mice are technically domestic mice. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. And then is the current understanding that humans came to North America with domesticated dogs, or is it believed that humans domesticated wolves separately in the Americas than from Asia, Europe, and Africa?
This is something whereas like dog domestication has many publications and papers that refute different things, where there are 2 domestication events, where they're 1. Well, the really only solid evidence we have of dogs at this time, and like what I would go with as my like not Bible, but the North Star of where I would go with this, is Angela Perry's 2019 paper. The dogs of the Amerindian dogs, the one I was just referring to with the Coster dogs in there, which I believe Meltzer was on that one, Gregor Larson, where they did talk about the different lineages of Amerindian dogs and the dispersal. And it does appear that dogs were domesticated in Siberia or East Asia, or maybe even Beringia, before they split off from the dogs that went to the Americas and the dogs that went to Eurasia and Africa and Australia later. So before the Americas opened, essentially, we go with the traditional narrative and evidence that would be the case, that dogs were brought with the Americans. Whether Clovis people or pre-Clovis people had dogs, there's no evidence for. Genetically, In theory, they did. But the oldest evidence we have for dogs in the Americas is the Coster dog, which is only 10,000 years old in Illinois. And then there's abundance of dogs after that, especially in the Mississippian period. Like, you can't do a site in Tennessee without dogs coming out of it, which I think is just a byproduct of, much like Tenochtitlan or any larger city in the Americas, you're going to have dogs.
Right.
Because you have more people. But yes, there's no evidence. I would like to think Clovis had dogs. I don't think you could be going across the continent that fast, eating a high protein diet that you can feed the dogs, and, you know, just to go into a continent by yourself without staking a computer into the ground that alerts you when there's tigers nearby. Like, it'd be challenging to me, though. Not to take away from the Clovis people, they could have done that without it, but it just makes more sense that they did, and the timelines do intersect. Yeah, but no evidence yet.
Because I've seen, I think, like, there's evidence in the plains, and, you know, the plains spreading from the Missouri River in the east, Rocky Mountains in the west. You know, you've worked extensively in the Northwest Plains, in the upper high prairie region, in the shortgrass prairie ecotone, from Canada down to Texas, huge region. And, like, when we do see dog remains, they're in intentional burials, meaning that people took the time to put that animal to rest. Mm-hmm. And that's how they're so well preserved, because they were intentionally buried and not just, like, left out in the sun and, you know, torn apart by scavengers and all that.
In the plains, you mean?
Yeah, in the plains. Yeah. And it's all in, like, the archaic period. So after, not, you know, like, what is it? Evidence for absence is not absence of evidence, like that old saying. Like, but we do see in the archaic period, between, like, what, 9,000 years ago and 1,500 years ago or 2,000 years ago, like, we start seeing more dog burials. And then I think there was, like, a thesis at University of Nebraska Lincoln that suggested that each of the four Pawnee bands had its own breed of dog. I haven't read the paper. Like, I've heard it, and I know my Tippo and also, you know, Chowee Chief, Matt Reed, really likes this paper and talks about it. I haven't read it yet, but, like, I don't know if that's even how you could figure that out from doing, like, zoomorphic analysis of, like, crania.
Right.
But who can say?
And much like that paper points out too, is that, or the Dr. Perry's paper, there's just so much interbreeding with European dogs that to get a glimpse of what Amerindian dogs look like without, because even by the time dogs are being photographed by, you know, in the 1800s, 1900s, by people going out there and photographing indigenous peoples, they would have been heavily mixed with European dogs, surely. So it's hard to say. But, like, if you found a pre-1492 burial, and to be lenient, let's say a pre-1600 burial, I would say that's probably an Amerindian dog. But I assume dogs, much like horses, just completely adapted and spread across the plains by themselves and, like, found camps immediately.
Yeah. And then I've had students ask, you know, what happened to the Amerindian dogs? And I've explained to them, you know, like, parvo was to Amerindian dogs like smallpox was to Amerindians. Like, parvo is what just annihilated Amerindian dog populations. And I always thought to myself, you know, as, like, your scholarship in science communication has showed, like, dogs, and even Dr. Taylor with horses, like, dogs, horses act as these connection points that people have everyday contemporary relationships with, and they're vehicles to science communication in the past and archaeology. And I've always wondered if more people would give a shit about the genocide of American Indian people if they realized there were hundreds of dog breeds that they'd never be able to post on Instagram because parvo wiped them out.
Yeah, that too.
Carolina dogs are tangentially Amerindian dogs, and then Chihuahuas. So
with Chihuahuas, it's such a hard thing to explain, but from my understanding, it's like Chihuahuas are, you know, the shape and the general Chihuahua vibe that you would think of as a Chihuahua existed pre-Columbian, but has interbred with so many native European dogs and then been bred back to, like, whoa, we want it to look more like a Chihuahua. And, like, they put it back to that it has European DNA, but it's, like, Chihuahua shaped, if that makes sense. It still has some remnant. That's, to my understanding, remnant stuff. But yes, the Carolina swamp dog, the Amerindian dog, Carolina dingo is also what it's called. and the Greenland dog have the most DNA that's still pre-Columbian in them.
I've come across a couple of Carolina dogs, and they're like really pretty animals. And when you look at them, you're like, there's a little bit more like primordial is not the right term, but they look much more like
lupine.
Yeah, lupine. That's a great word for it. You can see like, they're still, you're a working dog. You're a hunting dog. Like you have a purpose.
Yeah. Well, a dog like that, you can tell like can survive. A dog like a Chihuahua or a Shih Tzu is like, that needs Homo sapiens to exist.
Yeah.
And I think that adds to kind of like what you're saying, like that the lupinity, I guess would be the word.
Yeah.
But
no, they're definitely very cool. I've only met like 2 they were part of a hoarding case in Indiana. That's like, was just like over 3 dozen Carolina dogs packed in and forced to breed, and thing busted. And the person I knew at the time was caring for a couple of them. And I was just like,
so you've seen it like in real life, seen them. Yeah.
Yeah. Real life. Got a pet one.
Yeah.
Try to help rehabilitate one.
That's a glimpse into what dogs would have looked like for 10,000 years.
Yeah. I looked at one. I was like, man, it'd
rare.
be cool to have a Carolina dog, but I'm just such a cat person at this point. They're just easier to take care of.
Someone's offered me one after Strider died. They also offered me a high-end Cholo, and I was like, man, I think I'm good right now.
I miss Stridey. Stridey was a good boy.
Me too. He was a good dog.
Such a pretty man.
It was very pretty. Definitely the reason, I don't know to get into it, but like, he helped with my account. I wouldn't have had it without having that dog because he was so wolf-like and disobedient. But, well, because I said this on Ologies too. It's like, he's just such a different animal. Like it was like having a wild animal in my house I had to take care of more so than a pet. And that kind of gave me much more of a respect for like early domestic dogs. It's like, oh, this is an animal.
And he was big. And I don't think people really realize how big like he was a bratwurst of a tank.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just fluff. Like you pet him and you're like, oh, this is solid.
He is a strong dog. Yeah.
It's like, man, no, I rest in peace, Stridey. But
yeah,
hey, man, sure. I really appreciate you coming on the show. And
is that it?
Yeah, dude, I know 30 minutes goes by. I struggle with because I give 50-minute lectures all the time, and I like legit struggle with like 2 13-minute segments. So, but I appreciate you coming on to the show and dispensing us wisdom. For those that don't know who David is, I'll link all of his socials and channels in the episode description below. Absolutely follow Ethnosynology. It is a podcast I listen to. It's always fun hearing David. Yeah, no, it's a great time. So happy you were on the show today.
I'm glad to be on here. I'm glad to be your first guest, and just want to let you know I'm extremely proud of you. I tell you this all the time, but like it's really cool seeing you do what you do. You're on a million boards. You're doing this. You're doing that. You're always traveling. You're doing something. You're in the Caribbean. You're at a tribal thing. I don't know how you do it, man.
I don't know. I need to start saying no to things because I looked at the SA conference this week and I was like, I'm on 5 different things. Like that's just everyone does one. And my idiot ass, I have something every day. And I thought I learned from New Orleans and I clearly did not. So, but I appreciate that, man. All right, everyone. That was episode 18 of Great Plains Archaeology Podcast. We'll see you next time. Toodaloo. Thank you for listening to the Great Plains Archaeology Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at Pawnee_archaeologist, and you can also email me at greatplainsarchpodcast@gmail.com. And remember, anybody can love the mountains, but it takes a soul to love the prairie. American author Willa Cather.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.